Okay.
So as we prepare for the elections coming up on November 3rd, I thought it would be a good time for me to share with you all some of the information I've gathered on my research about the U.S. Electoral College. I've mentioned before that I love politics. It's something I enjoy. I follow a lot, and I also love history. So I spend some of my extra time just gathering information on a lot of different topics. And being the political junkie I am, the U.S. Electoral College is one thing that fascinates me. And so I've been doing some research on this, and I thought I would just put a quick speech together and share with you what I've gathered so far. So the U.S. Electoral College, is it a truly democratic system? So what is the Electoral College? This is the process by which the U.S. elects the president and vice president. So the Electoral College is made up of 538 electors who cast their votes to decide the president and vice president of the United States. How do we come up with the 538? That's the total number of representatives, senators, and the 3 electors that were given to the District of Columbia because it's not a state yet. And so each state is awarded 2 senators, as you may know, and then the number of representatives is based on the population of that state. And so that's how the Electoral College is decided, the number of electors that are allocated to each state. There are 2 senators and your number of representatives that represent you in Congress. So on election night, the candidate who receives a majority of the electoral votes wins the presidency. So in all the states, except for 2 states, the majority of the votes in the state, the person who wins the majority of the votes in the state is awarded the electoral vote for that state. So the 2 exceptions are Nebraska and Maine. For those states, the person who wins the total popular votes for that state gets 2 electoral votes for the 2 senators, and then the other votes are allocated by the congressional district. So each congressional district that you win, you get the electoral votes for that congressional district. So just to give you an idea, this is the map of this current electoral map from one of my favorite websites called 270 to Win. This website you go, you can get different, it's an interactive map that allows you to play around with electoral votes before elections, after elections. And so this map here shows you, for example, if you look at New York has 29 electoral votes. And if we get that 29 electoral votes because of our 2 senators and the 27 members of our congressional delegation. So how does it work? Each state will select the electors who meet in December after the election to cast their votes for the president and vice president. The states select their electors a lot of different ways. For New York, it's the state party for each political party that will decide the electors. And what happens is that after elections, after we vote on election night and the electoral votes for each state is awarded, the Electoral College members actually have to meet in December to cast their vote for the president officially, to make it official. The Constitution of the U.S. or the federal elections law, they don't compel the electoral voters to cast the votes by party. So that's something that it just happened by tradition over time. And then some states went ahead and changed the law and wrote laws to require that the electors follow the will of the people. So that way, whoever the people elect or whoever the people vote for in the state, who wins the popular vote, gets the electoral vote for that state. But it's not binding on the books for all states. So that is a concern. So at the end of the night, at the end of the election night, if no one gets a majority of the electoral votes, which currently is 270, the election goes to the House of Representatives. So it doesn't come back to the people. So it's the House of Representatives that then vote to decide who becomes the president. The top 3 candidates in the election are presented to the House of Representatives, and each state votes. They vote by congressional delegation. So going back to New York as an example, although New York has 27 representatives, New York will cast the vote, and whoever wins the majority of New York's delegation gets New York's vote as one. It's just one vote. All states get one vote. And the person at the end of the day who gets 26 states, so a majority of the states, when you see election. So how do we get this system? The founding fathers, when they debated the Constitution, they spent a lot of time trying to figure out what would be the best system to work. Some of them argue that the president should be picked by the people, and some argue that the president should not be picked by the people. But those who argue against the president being picked by the people, what we call the popular vote, they fear that ordinary people, they didn't know much about the candidates and won't be able to make an informed decision as far as who to vote for, so they didn't think they should. And there were others who also were afraid that you could have a populist president who will appeal to the people directly and will have a dangerous amount of power. So that's how they talked back then. And so they came up with this compromise system where the people select a group of people who then select who the president will be. Imagine that. So what are some of the pros and cons of this system? One of the pros is that it gives smaller states an equal voice, because it was just by the popular vote, the smaller people will focus on the bigger state and not the smaller state. So the smaller states at least get some say with this process. It also prevents disputes with elections, because clear-cut, you hardly get a runoff because the way it's allocated. So there's no confusion, and also reduces costs, because at the end of the day, you get a winner usually at the end of the day, at the end of the election, so you don't have to have second round of the election to decide who the winner is. Now the negative is that it gives too few states too much power. So because of the way it's set up, people might just focus on setting key states. How many times have you heard about Florida, Ohio? So it makes people focus on those states that are called battleground states and ignore other states. So that's one the negative to it, to that. And then also the will of the majority to be disregarded. There's at times where you hear someone wins the popular vote, but they end up losing the election because they lost the electoral vote. And another thing too is that it discourages voter participation by creating this whole feeling that your vote doesn't matter. So these are just some examples of sometimes in history where you had people who lost the popular vote and they still went on and won an election. You had, in the case of Andrew Jackson and John Quincy Adams. Quincy Adams lost the popular vote but still won the election. And so that's just some of the examples. In recent time, the one that a lot of people talk about would be in 2000 between Al Gore and George Bush. Remember that? And then most recently with Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. So that's one of the big issues with this system. So based on my research, I believe it's just time for a new compromise. It's time for us to consider how we allocate electoral votes by each state. I believe that my recommendation would be that the electoral votes be allocated by the popular votes in the state. So for instance, if a person wants 60% of the vote in that state, don't give them all the electoral votes, give them 60% of the electoral votes and have 40% goes to the person who won 40% of the votes. That way it will more represent the will of the people. And if no one's reaches the 270 number, then have a runoff election, a second election with the top two candidates, and don't have the House of Representatives be the one to pick the president. Let it be the people who pick the president. So just a quick example of what the electoral map looked like for the last election in 2016. And you can see that Hillary Clinton, a Democrat, got 232 of the electoral votes, and the Republican Donald Trump got 306 of the electoral votes. However, Hillary Clinton had almost 3 million more popular votes than Donald Trump. And here we are, Donald Trump is the president. So I believe that having it set up so they reflect the will of the people will be a better system. And there's just some research I've done on my own just to show you an example of if it had been done that way. At the end of the night, just a quick example, at the end of the night, Hillary Clinton would have ended up with 260 electoral votes. If you look at the bottom of the screen at this spreadsheet, and Donald Trump would have ended up with 253. No one reached 270, so it would have come back to the people again for a second round, a runoff election, and then at that point, a decision could be made. At least it will reflect better the will of the people. And I also went back the previous election, the last in 2012, when President Barack Obama ran for re-election. You can see that at the end of the night, he had 332 electoral votes compared to Mitt Romney's 258 electoral votes. But if you look at the actual popular vote, it was closer than that. Mitt Romney actually got 48% of the vote, while President Obama got 51%. How we allocated it based on that breakdown even though President Obama would have won, it would have been a more competitive election because he would have gotten 271 electoral votes versus Mitt Romney 258. So that's just an idea of a way that we can make the system better. And there's more to this, but I will share my findings on other topics in the future. Thank you.